Hi, welcome back. You'll remember that we were talking about the rise of the digital newsroom, and we'd seen the context within which digital newsrooms were created of rapidly declining print circulations and possibly more importantly, rapidly declining print revenues, and the rise of digital audiences. I was talking about the Manchester Evening News and the project which I headed up to develop a converged newsroom, and I was talking to you about the vision, the basis of the vision that we developed at the Manchester Evening News. And it's useful just to look at this, which is looking back a little bit, and of course things have moved on, but I think it's useful to understand the basic premise of digital newsrooms. So I was talking about the vision. The the key point is that it's about function and not format, and that's what we established as our premise, that we wouldn't focus entirely on the publishing platform that we were working on. So we wouldn't focus on print or online or social. We would say let's focus on the content. What is the function of that content? Is it features? Is it sport? Is it breaking news? Is it a long read? Is it an investigation? So what's the purpose of that? How does that serve our goal of interesting and engaging and growing an audience, which is how you then generate revenues by harnessing the power of that audience. And this was what it came down to. We like to keep things simple in journalism, so I wanted to try and make it clear to my colleagues in the newsroom, the other journalists, that this wasn't about undermining quality journalism. So we still regarded it as telling the best stories, and that had always been our goal throughout our time as at the Manchester Evening News, and way before my time, that we were interested in telling the best stories. However, we now had a range of new tools available which allowed us to tell those stories in the best way and at the best time. And that was really important, that we said we're just breaking away from this straitjacket that a print newspaper creates for us, where we have a deadline, and then about 6 hours later the finished product arrives on somebody's doormat. We were saying we've now got new tools which allows us to tell stories faster or in a more timely way, but also that we can tell those stories in an appropriate way. So if it's a story based around a great piece of video, we don't have to just take a series of stills and show people those stills. We can show them the video because we're using the best platform to tell that story. But I mentioned speed, but one of the great misconceptions about digital publishing early on, and I think it still persists to this day, that it's simply about getting your content out there as fast as possible. And that's as dumb as being tied entirely to a newspaper deadline. It should really be about smart publishing. It's about saying, what does this content do for us, and what does it do for our reader, and then thinking about the very best place to put that. So you need to think about speed, yes, but you need to think about what's an effective place for this to be, and also how is your company going to try and make money out of this? How do we drive people towards advertising? If we don't make money, we don't get paid. Other aspects of the vision was that we recognised that we needed to grow. We were in a world where we were constantly managing decline, and we felt our ambition should be for growth. So we recognised the growing demand for news, and that's one of the great ironies of this last 20 to 30 years. People have talked about the death of journalism, which is nonsense. There's actually a greater appetite now for news than there ever has been. So we were seeking to serve a growing demand for news. There was a declining demand for news in printed form. We were looking to create audiences which we could use and we could get to know better. Again, newspapers are a fairly blunt tool. People buy it for a whole host of reasons. You can't tell what they read. You can't tell what adverts they look at. You can't really assess how effective advertising is. And you can't segment that audience very effectively. You can say who generally buys your product, but you can't say who reads which particular sections of your newspaper. You can do that online. We're also keen just to try and enjoy ourselves a bit more. That there are a whole host of new technologies to be able to create maps and videos and polls and all of these things which we could actually use to try and help tell our stories better. So we really wanted to innovate, do new things to make journalism much more interesting for all of us. Um, but underlying all of this is that we needed to think about how do we make money in different ways other than just relying on selling newspapers. So that led to a massive redesign of the newsroom. So not only were we moving desks around, but we were moving positions around, creating new roles and creating new ways of communicating with one another. So we didn't have to rely on somebody on the print news desk emailing someone on the web news desk to tell them that something was going on, which is bizarrely how it used to happen. So that was our initial solution. So that's the MEN newsroom. You may recognise it. They've moved downstairs in that building now. This was the third building I worked in with the MEN because we moved around a little bit. We used to be on Deansgate in the middle of Manchester, and then we moved to another building on Deansgate, and then we moved out to this building, which is on the side of the M60 in Chadderton, Oldham. And so you see that circular desk there. That was the hub. We were challenged by the shape of the building. It sounds bizarre, but we had a long, thin building, and so we had to try and fit our newsroom into that. And so to some extent, we were dictated to by the room, but we created this news hub. And something we learned that quite soon, that was about the third news hub we created. Something we realised very quickly was that if you put people around the outside of a circular desk, which we did in our first news hub when we were on Deansgate, people couldn't see each other because of all the screens. So we found it's better that you had a news hub which backed onto each other, because you can just flip your chair around, have a quick chat, everyone can hear each other better. So little simple lessons like that really help to improve the efficiency of this hub. And it's an important feature. It sounds daft talking to you now about tables and chairs, but that's radically different to the way that the industry had operated for decades before that, with traditional layouts of newsrooms. So on that news hub, we've got people producing the newspaper in the centre ground there. For two people closer to the camera producing in charge of producing the newspaper, but over on the right hand side is the web team. You'll see Paul Gallagher sitting over there, who's now the head of digital innovation at Reach, which owns the Manchester Evening News. So they're producing or focusing on the web, but behind them is the news desk, so they're focusing on controlling all the reporters. So also one of the versions of the news hub we also had a TV station based on there and a radio station. And then we had the challenge of how do you bring people together when there's so many of you around. And so we had various solutions to that. So there's this combined news hub, not necessarily the most senior people in each organisation working together. Sometimes you'd have very senior people working with very junior people. It all came down to who needed to know what and who needed to know things first. So yeah, we reorganised our newsroom. That's just a planned view of how it looked. So we developed new publication priorities. So rather than saying we're going to do it for an edition of the newspaper, we'd say, well, we're going to focus on being story first. Some people took a different view. The Guardian always talked about web first. Other people talked about print first. And we said, no, let's just do it story first. Whatever works best for this story is the way we'll do it. We had to be careful. We developed systems around identifying stories which were safe versus unsafe, because when you start having a much more complex publication process and a much more complex workflow, you need to ensure that stories are either flagged as safe or unsafe. So if it hasn't been legaled, it hasn't been checked, we need to make sure no one's just going in and taking that content and misunderstanding it as safe. And also we made a distinction between live and exclusive. So that live obviously is going to be that breaking news, it's getting it out there as soon as possible. But exclusive content costs a lot of money. You invest a lot of staff time in investigations, and you need to manage when those go out, and you need to try and generate as much financial benefit out of that in terms of readership and advertising revenue. And we transformed the way that we had conference, so a meeting that we had every day between all the various parts of the newsroom, to be able to pull together sport, news, and business, but also to be able to pull in our TV station, Channel M, radios with Smooth FM, but also the websites, as well as the weekly and daily print publications. So a way of having an editorial conference which allowed people to all contribute and not be excluded. The upshot was the project that was launched in September 2018. So this was launched after I left, but this is the latest manifestation, is Newsroom Live, and it's very much a web-led model where basically content is published online, and then the newspaper is an amalgam of content that's been placed online. So they've really moved towards web first now. By this year now, there's more than 1 million daily unique browsers. It's a vast website, driven largely, I have to say, by the Man City, Man United content. That's a massive draw. Meanwhile, the print circulation, I told you earlier on that print circulation was in the region of over 200,000 when I joined in 1998. Well, now in terms of paid for print circulation, it's down at around 13,000 paid for copies of the Manchester Evening News. They declare just under 30,000 circulation under the Audit Bureau, which is called ABC. COVID has had a massive impact this year, but they run at about 30,000 copies out there, half of which are given away free. But it's a massive online organisation. I'm just going to pause there to move on to another section of this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the background of the kind of the big business moves that were going on behind all of this. So I'll see you in the next video.